Hi, I'm Cody Anderson, one of the pastors here at Parker United Methodist Church. On Sunday, we started a new sermon series called The People of God, and we're thinking about the ways in which we, the people of God, are called to live out our faith in the world. We hear from Scripture that we are to be set apart, but what does that really mean? For some, it means just being a good person. And for others who are trying to figure out how to live their faith, they have a set of rules, things that they want to accomplish, the ways in which they want to live out their life, and the means to be able to do that. So there's a wide variety of ways in which we can do that. As United Methodists, we draw on the foundation of our history, of our tradition, from John Wesley, who in the 1700s began this movement of people who methodically thought about their faith and lived out their faith, hence the name Methodists. So John Wesley tried to make it really easy for us by giving 3 simple rules. There's this wonderful little book called The 3 Simple Rules, a Wesleyan way of living, that you can read in a day if you want to learn an in-depth piece about what was John Wesley thinking and how are we called to live out that faith. But the 3 simple rules are this: do no harm, do good, and stay in love with God. Sounds pretty easy. And yet when we really start to unpack each one of these rules, we can see that it is a little bit more difficult than just 3 simple rules, right? So each week, Pastor Laura and myself are going to take you through these rules one at a time to kind of unpack them, to figure out what is God really calling us to do. If we're called to do no harm, what does that look like? If we're called to do good, what does that really mean? If we're called to stay in love with God, what in the world is that? So Pastor Laura on Sunday did a great job of starting us off as she thought about and helped us think about how to do no harm, the people of God who do no harm. And if you haven't watched that sermon yet, I encourage you to go to our YouTube channel and make sure to look for the service from the 13th. It's really powerful and really helpful for you as we continue to unpack this rule. So do no harm. What does that mean? Well, Pastor Laura asked us on Sunday, how many of you have started out your day intentionally thinking about doing harm? How many of you guys want to do harm? There were no hands that went up. Because for most of us, I'm going to even kind of almost go to all of us, we don't want to do harm. We don't want to harm others. We don't want to harm ourselves. We don't want to harm the world that we live in. We're trying not to cause harm. That's part of our nature. But the fact is that harm still happens, right? Even if we intentionally don't seek out to do harm, harm still happens in our world. School started up the last week for my kids anyway, and I know a lot of kids are starting up this week as well. But one of the things that they talk a lot about is the paper, right? So they'll tell kids, grab a piece of paper, see how it's fresh and clean, there's no marks on it, right? But then when you start to say hurtful things or hurtful actions against somebody else, or against, people do that against you, your paper begins to get crumbled. Yourself begins to have some hurts. And if you try to unwrap that, it's hard, right? To try to undo that. I can't undo the damage that happened to this piece of paper by wrinkling it up, right? There's no way. I mean, yes, it's still a piece of paper, but now there are wrinkles in it and it'll never be flat again. So Jackson came home from 8th grade and he was talking about his first day of school, and he said his teacher used a bag of chips. Okay, so if I open this bag of chips, ooh, there are chips that are fully intact and delicious, right? That's what happens in our lives when people are good to us, when no harm has happened. But the problem is that, especially starting off in middle school, but even throughout our adult lives, there are times that we might act out against somebody. We might cause harm against somebody. And even though it might not look like it on the outside, when I open up my chips, now I just have crumbles. And so his teacher was sharing about how they need to work at not crushing each other's chips. They needed and ask them, each other and themselves, how are your chips doing in your bag? Seems kind of silly, but they're really great images for us to kind of grab a hold of. What are the ways in which we might be causing harm to other people? And again, not intentionally, because most of us don't start off intentionally trying to cause harm against somebody else, but are there ways in which we cause harm? For instance, are there people that we walk by and never see? And because of that, they are harmed because they don't feel like they're worthy. They don't feel like people notice them. They don't feel like they're loved and cared for. This happens a lot within our homeless population here in our nation. The fact is, they've said, is that we need 5 touches a day, 5 good touches as humans to feel good. And the homeless population doesn't even get 1 or 2 good touches for weeks on end, because people just walk past them, because people avoid their eye contact. And there's harm that's caused by that. There's harm that is caused by that separation of not seeing, of not purposefully interacting with somebody. That's kind of a bigger thing that happens, but there's also these smaller moments too, right? I'm in a hurry, I'm stressed out, and because I'm short with somebody else, that might crush their chips. That might make them feel like things aren't that good. Certainly doesn't share love with them. In the letter to the Galatians, chapter 5, Paul writes these words, starting in verse 13. For you were called to freedom, brothers and sisters. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for self-indulgence, but through love, become servants to one another. For the whole law is summed up in a single commandment. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. If, however, you bite and devour one another, take care that you are not consumed by one another. Paul was recognizing this humanness that not only happens in our world, in our communities, but also in the church. There are times in which we, the people of God, cause harm to one another. There are times where we, the people of God, who are called to be set apart to live differently than the world, also cause harm in the world. And the thing that I hate the worst is when people say, oh, those Christians, they're always doing something that is hurting other people, right? I hate being lumped up as a people of Christians who are causing harm, because I'm not trying to cause harm in this world. And yet I have to recognize that as a part of that community, there sometimes is harm that happens. And how can I breach that? How can I ask for forgiveness? How can I be a repairer of those bridges that have been broken? There are so many things that we have to evaluate and to really look at as we think about being a people who do no harm. It's hard though. It's hard work, because none of us want to look at the icky stuff that comes out of our lives and also comes out of the communities that we're a part of. We don't want to feel shame. We don't want to feel like we were in the wrong. We want to be good people. And part of being good people is recognizing that sometimes we harm others intentionally or unintentionally most of the time. So recognizing that harm that is happening and then being able to work to stop it. Right? Trying to be in a good place in my day, centering myself in God's love so that I don't cause harm to somebody when I'm driving because they cut me off and I'm frustrated. Trying to center myself in God's love so that my eyes are opened up to the needs of those around me and I see people. I see people for who they are, the image of God within them, and I remind them and treat them as a child of God. And then the huge systems that I'm a part of that still cause harm, and it's not me individually that's doing it, but I can recognize that as a part of that community, harm has happened, and I can reach out and I can say, I understand, I hear you, and I ask for forgiveness, right? These are some of those ways. So we don't have to feel shame. We don't have to feel like, oh my gosh, I'm the worst person in the world. God extends that forgiveness to all of us, even those situations where we didn't know that we've harmed others. And so our work, though, is not to turn a blind eye. Our work is to really think about the ways in which we cause harm and do better. Maya Angelou had this great quote that I love. It says, when I didn't know better, I didn't do better. But now that I know better, I'm going to do better. We, as the people of God, are called to continue to learn, continue to grow, continue to do better. And when we know better, then we're called to do better. So how can we do better? How can we be intentional about this piece of these 3 simple rules? How can we really embrace it and look at our ick and then ask for forgiveness and make changes that help us alleviate doing harm? These are some of the hard questions as we delve into this first rule. And I encourage you to lean in, encourage you to evaluate, encourage you to ask, how are people's bags of chips around me? And what can I do to make people's chips whole? 3 simple rules. Not always easy to live by, but simple in the fact that we can remember them and we can do the hard work of starting to figure out the ways in which we cause harm and do better. I'm on this journey with you too, my friends. It's not easy work, but I'm right there with you. And I know by the grace of God that we can do better.